to remote work and telecommuting, from COVID response to sustainable work arrangements. I am joined today by some of my colleagues from the UNM IT leadership team. My name is Elaine Rising, and I'm the Associate Director of Community Programs and Strategic Initiatives at UNM IT. And I'm joined today by Brian Pietrewicz, our Deputy CIO, Elisha Allen, the Director of Academic Technologies, Alicia Torres, Director Enterprise Applications, and Greg Gaillard, Associate Director Campus Outreach and Engagement. I think Brian.
Okay, so this is intended to be a panel discussion. I'll just lead off with that. So if anybody has any questions or just discussion topics and wants to jump in, feel free to do that. But we do have some slides that we'll start out with, just talking about some of our experiences with the pandemic, and obviously it's in relation to IT and the things that we do. So I'll start off just by talking about one of the principles that IT operates on is creating what's called a foundation for execution. So it's a little bit difficult to describe exactly what that is, but in general terms, what it means is we create sort of a framework or an architecture that also includes processes that enables us to be able to respond to customer needs very quickly. So read that. One way to think of it is, if a customer needs something, generally we're not building things from scratch. We have approximately 80% of the foundation, basically I guess you'd call it the foundation, already built, so that when a customer needs something, when faculty need something, staff, students, when they need something, we only really have to build that top 20% because the 80% of the foundation is already built. And so it enables us to react very quickly and meet needs very quickly. Some examples of that during the pandemic, some things that everybody saw very, very quickly, because we all had to figure out how to work remotely almost overnight. And the good news was, generally, we were very successful in doing that because of a foundation for execution. But examples include things like Zoom, the Lobo check-in app that was used for multiple components of functionality and associated with COVID screening and that kind of thing. There's a very long list. I won't read them all to you, but it was over 100 different things that we ended up having to deploy to enable us to continue operations during the pandemic, which basically meant everybody was working from home. So remote tools, another example would be something like Gaillard. So everybody's working from home. We can't come out and physically look at your machines anymore. We had applications that we just expanded very quickly to be able to remote into people's machines and help fix them. So that's kind of the foundation for execution. It's kind of a framework and an underlying architecture that we use to be able to deploy quickly. And just another side note, so sometimes we're working with folks, and I always like to describe it as the what versus the how. So a lot of times, so we have no issue with delivering what. So when a customer, faculty, staff, student comes to us and says, "I need this," that's a what, right? And we can deliver those things very quickly. Sometimes when things become challenging, it's when we get into the how. Sometimes if people expect us to deliver it in a particular way, using a particular type of technology, that's where things can get challenging, because sometimes those hows don't always work with that foundation for execution that we've built, and it becomes a one-off solution that we have to build from top to bottom, and it's a lot more resource intensive to do it that way, hence the how. So what is not really a problem for us, we can usually do that fairly well. Sometimes it's the how. We have to think, and how we deliver things can be a challenge. So I'll leave it at that on foundation of execution. And if anybody has any questions or thoughts, again, feel free to chime in. And I guess we could jump to the next slide. So I'll be brief on this one, but the priorities during the pandemic are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, it was the safety of employees first, in particular the tier 1 employees, folks that had to be on campus because they have to physically touch something. obviously setting up virtual environments so that people could work remotely was a very high priority. Data security, you wouldn't think that it would have become an issue during the pandemic. And I don't think that the things that occurred, there were some anecdotal things that were indirectly associated that created some security issues. But generally, just we saw huge amounts of hacker activity. I don't know why, but all of a sudden the hackers decided to start hitting us. And thank you for all your cooperation with all the different security controls we had to put in place, like MFA. We also, put a focus on clear and effective communication because that was a challenge in the remote world. And we have, I think, done a lot to improve that. And then also continued effectiveness for operations. Another example of something that foundation helped us with that adds to that execution of operations is Learn doubled. I think it was doubled. It might have been more than doubled in size overnight. And because we had that foundation of execution, we were able to accommodate that. We could see this problem coming. We were able to scale laterally very quickly and handle that to continue operations. So that's it on that slide. We can jump to the next slide. And
can I chime in really quick on the priority when we were talking about data security?
Alicia, we're here having a hard time hearing you. At least I am.
Oh, sorry. Let me fix that.
Does that sound better?
It's scratchy now. Just be closer to your machine, I think.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes, there you go. There you go.
So one of the things I just wanted to chime in on that last slide, just on the data security, what I think a lot of people maybe don't know is that we went from having priorities around definitely the student component, the overall administrative and staff component, but we also stood up several applications around COVID information and data where we were working really close with the hospital and with HSC. And so some of the data security components were what we had to lay onto our current foundation really came into play on some of the information from a HIPAA perspective and other items like that. So just wanted to kind of share that, our scope and priority components actually grew during this pandemic as well.
So this slide is actually intended to be a transition slide where I wanted to remind folks that on top of the foundation and priorities, you may have heard Brian mention, shout out a thank you for everybody's willingness to sort of roll with a number of changes. And if you look at the foundation and the priorities as capacity, leveraging the capacity, which was designed to be flexible, most effectively requires an IT service model where, to a certain degree, IT service management, and especially in EDU, really does focus on people, process, and technology. Many of you have heard that before. Now, in the past year or so, it's been more important in terms of making sure that that capacity reaches you all and then loops back in the most useful and effective way. And to a certain degree, it required cross-team collaboration, clear leadership direction in terms of telling us what, when, and how. You all were invaluable, all of you, the whole of campus, the community, in making sure that we got it right to the extent that we could and continue to move on. The clear leadership was really expressed in ways that empowered many of us to assist in ways that were fundamentally different, that ensured safety. The feedback and honestly, the communication and direction linked to understanding that we were all working through this together. That came home as your input and feedback and helping us understand what we didn't know. None of us knew what we didn't know until we worked through this together. The community really helped. The team that I sort of manage, which are the distributed IT managers working with each of the teams that you see represented here, along with the IT service managers out in the areas, really came through in terms of clear communication and helping each other out. Process, to a certain degree, we all agreed, here's our toolkit, this is the foundation, Let's standardize on these things and then align with what works, feedback from you all, and then what we can do and get leadership support for it and move forward. And ultimately the technology, I don't want it to come last. It's actually the foundation, but at a certain level, we're seeing what we've done is, really create a framework that we can potentially carry forward and take advantage of in a different way and look at UNM's workforce as a flexible workplace opportunity. But I want to step back and make sure that everybody knows that the technology, done right, it seems like magic. Just know that you guys are part of all the magic that happened. And honestly, there's a strategy behind it that I'll let Alesia in the next slide speak to what's possible and what we learned.
Thank you, Greg. So kind of, as you can see, we really want to hone in on how do we become more effective at working remotely? How did we kind of move into that direction? And there's several of the tools here that we laid on top of those standard processes on the standard technology foundations that we had. And again, as Greg mentioned, several of these are not possible without you all and the campus community helping us to get them there. I mean, that's why we do our jobs, is to enable UNM through technology. And you can see some of the items on here. UNM Learn, for example, moving from that 8,000 max concurrent user number all the way up. One that is not on this current slide, but we also chatted about that might be known to you all, is that we didn't even have a Microsoft Teams meetings for use across campus. And now we have about 5,500 meetings a month being scheduled through Microsoft Teams. And that service was actually stood up in a fairly quick amount of time because of the technology and the foundation that we had in place. We had to move from, I love this part, 100-plus-year-old campus model within 2 weeks, getting everybody to be able to learn remotely, work remotely, and be effective at doing those things. We stood up wireless sites at various parking lots. I have one of our staff members, she also teaches, and she mentioned that several of her students were actually taking classes from the parking lot on these remote sessions and explaining how great the connectivity were for them, and that they didn't have connection at home. They didn't have the ability to connect to their classes at home, and that we were able to, as an institution, bring that connectivity to them so they can continue their classes and their education. So, it really comes to bear that everything that we put in place and working together with the campus, we were able to continue some of these very important services across campus. Next slide, Elaine. And to me, the most important, when we kind of talked about the people being first on that other slide, is the people. And really looking at what were the impacts, right, to our staff, to our team members, to everybody on campus. We talk about Zoom burnout. We talk about, we went from moving to meetings, walking across campus to go to a meeting. Gosh, we take that for granted now, right? I mean, I used to say, oh my gosh, I have to commute to my next meeting, but now I miss it. It actually gave me a chance to take a walk, say hi to people, run into somebody that I might not have seen for a while, do some networking, ask a question of somebody, and actually be a little bit more efficient in that respect. We took some staff specifically in IT who were already working after hours and several weekends to now they were basically 24/7. Specifically in my group, I knew we had to stand up at least 2 to 3 applications within the first 3 days that we started to go remote within 24 hours in order to start tracking events and travel and other things. A lot of folks on Brian's team, similarly, Elisha's team from Zoom and other components. So the staff were really impacted by having to move to this remote work. I know that the end users and our partners across campus were heavily impacted, having to learn new technologies, plus, trying to teach their classes and do what they need to do as effectively as possible. So it's really important that we hone in on how this did impact everybody as human beings across campus, and that we had to quickly shift and adapt to make sure we were accounting for those additional changes. We always care about our team members and making sure that they're doing work-life balance, but this really added an extra layer to what was going on. Next slide. Elisha.
I have to say, I love I forgot I'm muted. That's got to be the catchphrase of 2020. I guess moving forward from the pandemic and all the things that Elisha mentioned, what we want to do as an institution, I think, is to take the best of both worlds, right? We don't want to live in that pandemic fear, everybody's overworked place. But we also know that we learned some important things during the pandemic about how to use technology, maybe how to add some work-life balance through the use of technologies and these things. And so that's where we're looking forward and working with HR on guidelines and processes. And I'm sure you have all seen the rollout documents. But one of the things that we see nationally is that there is a high percentage of people who want to continue to work remotely in some fashion. I've seen as high as 80% figures nationally of those people that have the ability to work from home that also want to. The challenge that we have is that we still have faculty and students on campus. There are services that are being offered to in-person cohorts and groups. And so I think that really what that's going to require is for us to think about services in a slightly different way, and especially in terms of how we communicate and how we collaborate across teams so that we can provide that kind of coverage and also offer that kind of flexibility that staff are looking for. I have a number of concerns around how we maintain institutional and organizational culture in a completely remote environment. I think we've done reasonably well during a pandemic, but those kinds of micro interactions that Elisha is talking about, walking across campus, maybe getting a cup of coffee, those things do have value. And as we move to remote work, we need to make sure that we're working with our teams to employ strategies that will encourage some of those informal communication and collaboration. And just the simple, hey, Greg, how was your day? What'd you do over the weekend? You might think of that as lost work time at one level, but it is how we build a culture. It's how we build friendships and communities, and that becomes the grease to the wheels of how everything operates at some level. Some of the things that people have liked about remote work, and especially during the pandemic, is there was, I would say, in the IT world, a fairly good direction in the sense that we were empowered to quickly make some of those changes that we needed to make and focus around priorities. There was quite a bit of potential for burnout, and I think that we have seen some of that. People have really rallied in amazing ways, and shouts out to all of the staff and faculty and students who helped us to get through this just unimaginable cataclysm. But it did take a toll. And so I think moving forward, what we're looking for is more of a balance that helps people find some more job satisfaction and help people maintain more of that motivation in the long term by thinking about remote work, not just in the situational pandemic context, but in more of a telework team collaboration, we're moving forward kind of a manner of thinking.
So we have just given an overview of just barely a glimpse into what IT has gone through in the last year. And I know it's impacted everyone because our services, just being able to connect, the internet, the meetings, everything that IT provides impacts everyone and will continue to impact everyone as we do a hybrid return to work. So if you have questions for the panelists, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. We welcome any questions at this point from the audience. And I know you might have some questions around how things might work or what you've experienced. But until we have any questions from the audience, we do have some more to share with you in the way of answering some natural questions that we feel like people might have, at this time and over what's happened in the past year and so forth. And just to kind of get the panelists' perspective on change, to say that the UNM and IT went through change last year would be the grandest understatement, because of all the things that we've indicated to everyone about the number of Zoom meetings, the number of Teams meetings, the number of online everything. It's just been a massive amount of effort to move everyone from on campus to off campus. But there's individual impacts and organizational impacts with change. So Elisha, if you wanted to comment on how you as an individual and IT as an organization might have managed change through all this time period.
Sure, absolutely. So we in IT, let's speak to the organization first, and going a little bit back to that foundation for execution. We do have a very solid change management process throughout IT, and it includes the communication, the tracking, the approvals, the collaboration and working with campus and HSC on the various changes that happen to our environment to ensure that we're doing the proper testing, we're doing the right rollbacks, we're communicating the information. So we really did a solid leveraging of that. We had to make a few adjustments to ensure that our meetings and our change approvals and things like that were definitely automated. We added some components to ensure that text messages for more expedited changes occurred, which was very helpful on the communication front, made us more effective. So it was really, really helpful to have that in place and then to be able to just adapt it as we went along. We, to kind of touch on, we were able to take very thoughtful risks, and kind of what Elisha was talking about is we were empowered a bit more to make decisions a little bit quicker, make the changes in a more efficient fashion. Now, granted, making sure we had all the right things in place so things didn't break, but we were definitely more empowered to say, okay, make the decision, make that change, and move forward. So that was also very helpful in that respect, and really just finding grace. I think working collaboratively with each team, having a little bit of grace with yourself. So individually for me, I have to maybe take a step back and go, okay, change is happening. As IT people, we live in change a lot, but it's not always comfortable. Change isn't a comfortable thing. So finding a little bit of grace for yourself, finding grace for others, being really open and collaborative about the risks and transparent about what's happening, and just really being open and working with each other. And I think Brian, you had some good ideas about that empowerment on making decisions and what you saw at your level as well. You want to chime in on that?
Finding the mute button, most common phrase. So yeah, actually, how do I say this in the correct way? I actually really kind of loved what I saw from a work perspective and from an IT perspective during the pandemic. And the reason why was, what I saw was we had to make decisions quickly. We couldn't sit around and debate things and discuss things and try to figure out if we were doing the right thing and the perfect thing in every case, and we didn't overanalyze. We just knew some things needed to happen, and we made decisions, and then we made them happen. And to be honest, I hope it stays this way. We accomplished more, UNM IT, so I've been here for almost 9 years. We accomplished maybe not twice as much, that might be an exaggeration, but we accomplished significantly more than I've ever seen in any other year because of that situation, because of the, not just the ability, but the need to make decisions quickly and to execute quickly. And to some of the points that Elisha made about foundation for execution as it relates to change. The thing that was nice was we had built that foundation, and we proved that we could move very quickly on a lot of things. And from a change perspective, I have a thought, but I know it's going to have like a mixed bag of results because it really depends. Each person was impacted differently, both from a personal and a professional perspective. But generally within IT, and I'll say this is probably about 60 to 70% true. Generally in IT, because we had this foundation for execution, we already had the framework, so that there wasn't, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, from an operations perspective, there really wasn't significant change. The change that happened was the need to move quickly. And because we had this framework in place, we were able to move very, very quickly on a lot of different things. And so while there was a lot of personal change that impacted, I think, everyone, I know it certainly impacted me, from an operations and an IT perspective, because we had that framework, that foundation of execution, there wasn't actually significant change. We weren't figuring out how to do the base level activity on the fly. We already had it nailed down. It was just adapting to the pandemic related things. They caused a little bit of change and some adjustment, but generally, it seems like we were pretty well prepared for it.
Elaine, one of the things, and just to extend that a little bit more, looking at the way that IT leadership operated, and I think it's with some irony that I feel like as a leadership team, we were closer in the last year than we were when our offices were right next to each other. A lot of that was by force of necessity, but using tools like Microsoft Teams, where we had to quickly triage issues, and Dwayne Arudi, the CIO, said, okay, we're meeting for an hour every day at 4. And that continued for most of the spring and the summer, and we backed off after that. But that was much more frequently than we had ever met before. We were able to quickly say, okay, what were the issues of the day? Elisha, is this something your team can take on, or are you aware of this? I was at this meeting with instructional continuity. Or, Brian, do you know that there's some changes coming down the pike? Communication increased dramatically during this time, and not just with leadership team. I think many of us have now daily or multiple times daily where we're in communication with our whole teams, where that might have been really challenging to do from a scheduling perspective in the past. When can I find an hour when everyone's available? So I think that was a big part of how we managed those changes.
I think so too. I think you're right, Elisha. And I just remember we used to have leadership meetings every Tuesday afternoon, and it went to daily. And we often went past 5 o'clock. They were 4 to 5 p.m. daily, even Fridays, 4 to 5. And we went after 5 o'clock quite often, talking about all the issues that we had to talk about as a leadership team. And talking within our organization was critical in order to manage all this change. But then that was particularly impactful for Greg and his group, because Greg then has to communicate outward to all the ITO managers that are distributed across the organization. So Greg, can you talk a little bit about your communication strategy that you employed to spread the word from IT leadership out to the distributed leadership?
Sure. To a certain degree, if you track what everybody's saying about coming together as a leadership team, making rapid execution, types of decision, where oftentimes it was very directive towards the team within the teams, which are the ITOs, and to a certain extent, the whole of campus outreach as it describes campus IT. So the directives are often given end of day, maybe a little after 5. And that's when sort of integrating all the operational issues that my team had sort of collected over the course of the day. I mean, remember, this is early on. How are we going to do this safely? Integrating the directives, integrating those other issues. And then work started after that last meeting, try to get ready, get a little sleep, and then get up, where fortunately a number of us are early risers and prepare for, we had early morning meetings where at 7:30, 7:45, try to keep it to 15 minutes and would always go over every day. Cue the issues to carry forward, go through the day, share at leadership or throughout the day as part of an agenda, rinse, repeat. Long days. The team with humor, with all of the sort of suggestions you've already heard, really got to know each other well and began to naturally cover for each other, surface areas of expertise, and became, to a certain degree, whole, where it began to include functional input as well. And that community piece slowly and surely became whole again as a framework for an opportunity that we're looking at right now. That said, situational remote work, work from home, as I've just described it, some of it is this role, and it wouldn't have been possible without the people, and ultimately the area's engagement with the IT managers. It's all about that people, process, and the technology that makes it real and informs us as to next steps. But it definitely was a stressful period where everybody stepped up, and we've got other questions that will track to that. But thank you, Elaine.
Yeah.
It was a once in a lifetime experience that we all learned from.
Let's hope once in a lifetime. Yes, and we had a couple shout outs from EOD in the chat. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate the feedback that we hear from campus, because the sort of unsung heroes from IT who worked literally 24/7, late at night, weekends, just to keep this going and set up everything we had to set up at the beginning and through the pandemic, as evidenced by our 35% of our staff have over the amount of leave in their banks than they're allowed, which indicates a little bit about the working stress of the last year in IT. And not to say that plenty of other people on campus didn't have to work just as hard, and we know they did, but it was just a particularly challenging transformation of the university to remote. And Teresa Anderson has a question about instrument computers. I'm not sure what the question is. Do you want to type that, Teresa, or do you want to turn your mute button?
I got the mute button off. So
Yay.
I don't know if this is the forum for doing it, but I am responsible for a lot of the instruments in chemistry and some of the instruments over in Earth and Planetary Science. And we need computers for that. Now you guys have rolled over to Windows 10, which works pretty much 75% of the time. The rest of it has to be Windows 7. The problem that I'm having with Windows 10 is that you guys, and I understand why, won't give an administrative account to these people. Now, that's a problem because we've got to load the software and keep that software up. Is there maybe a policy or something that we can work out so that when the computers go down and I rebuild an old computer for them, I load Windows 10 on it? Because it's an instrument computer, it's not a personal computer. We can address this so that it's not a fight every time.
Yes, that's actually a topic of conversation that came up during an arts and sciences sort of all hands forum where that specific question was a focal point. And there is a support model in a couple of places that is being considered that will help sort of scope what it is that you need very, very, very clearly, and that it becomes a repeatable process that technicians in your area can work with you to ensure. We understand, you know, the mass spectrometer from, 2001, subtle illusion there, but honestly, I get it, it needs that particular piece. It also needs to be secured. And that step is something that we need to recognize, that the more exceptions there are, the more costs there is, not in terms of dollars, but in terms of time. So coming up with a model, a policy that is area specific, but ultimately tracks to best practice in UNM policy is how we're focusing on this type of issue, where instruments aren't the only type of exception that suggests we need something that isn't the campus standard. We need an exception, like a specialized version of Linux that, you know, does certain things. All of these sort of, let's just call them service exceptions, can be defined in an area specific policy in a way that aligns with other teams' policies, and will find ways to work with you to get it done. The key is that nobody is out on an island.
So
This is the
hey,
opportunity. Go for
so
it.
Greg, can we give them service counts?
Yes, sir. That's the shift that we're going to try to work out and make sure that it's in policy. We've actually shared model policy.
Okay.
So how far along are we on that?
I actually will be talking with the ITO for that area tomorrow. So hopefully we'll get a status check on that. We really do need to make sure that it's worked with some of the key stakeholders. And if you're willing to be a representative for, you know, a stakeholder meeting, just sort of here's how we're looking at that adjustment, because we've heard and we've integrated what was best practice. You know, it doesn't necessarily fit where it had to really be buttoned up, given the security concerns where we didn't know what we didn't know. Now we do, and I'll touch base and see where the ITO is for working through that policy. And it is, remember, local policy that reflects an area specific need. That is part of the campus outreach ITE&E programmatic fundamental, you know, ethos. Don't break anything, don't do any harm. This is one of those steps.
Okay, I understand,
Great.
but I'm going to say that an area specific, and I'm not criticizing here, but an area specific seems a little bit too narrow, because I know with physics and with earth and planetary science and myself, and by the way, that special Linux system, yeah, that's ours, because we're a pain, that runs our magnets. I think it needs to be a campus-wide thing, because I know we have North Campus over there that has the same kind of instrumentation. I know engineering comes over and we work together on different instrumentations. This needs to go across, and I'm trying to encourage them to buy the computers with the systems, but sometimes we inherit these systems. Now, if we do get a computer with the system, IT, now that's a university property, IT will help us, right? Or is that a campus-wide, no, you're on your own since you bought that computer with the instrument?
There should be, what I'm trying to share is campus-wide, the program, the IT effectiveness and efficiency program that created this model where each area has an IT manager. Fundamental premise, do no harm, where we will leverage campus-wide policy standards, approaches, and strategies where it makes sense, and where we can support exceptions that are requirements. And we're talking about something pretty specialized when, you know, this is a PC running Windows 7 or Linux, or how about other, you know, software requirements. These are the types of things that, or specialized security requirements. These are the types of things that I am trying to capture as exceptions, where we have area policy that says if there's an exception, there needs to be sort of a team that solves for it. And then the thing is we can share across teams how we solved. So it is campus-wide. It's simply capturing what you've described, two things. We've got a long list, and the key is making sure that we codify it and we share solutions wherever possible. I hope that makes some sense.
Hey, Greg, maybe we can just take if it works for you, maybe we just take this one offline, talk to Greg about the potential of, talk to Dwayne about the potential of service accounts and enabling them for folks campus wide. I get it's doing things campus wide is almost impossible. That's very difficult because whenever you're doing something to help somebody, it's making somebody else upset. But we might be able to make it an opt-in. So if we, and then that might enable the ability. So why don't we take that one offline and talk to Dwayne about it and see if we can move it forward.
Got it.
That'd be great, because I'm in a need now. I've got professors setting stuff up, and this is the same fight I have every time. And I don't mind, and I know how to get around it, but I don't feel safe doing that. And I don't want to touch your Windows 10.
Understood. We'll rally, and I'll touch base with the ITO, and we'll make sure that we've got the right visibility on this moving forward. We understand this is an opportunity to really pin down something that's sort of drifted one way or the other. I hope you understand that we see the problem and we do have an approach. So we'll get some visibility on it, and hopefully you're willing to help us. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a solution that can work. I'm not familiar with the details, but we have a solution that can work. And just a heads up is it's a little bit inconvenient. I don't like it myself. But just to give you a little bit of data to understand.
My phone froze. Sorry.
What was that?
I missed part of that because my phone froze. This little phone has a hard time with Zoom.
So we have a solution that works, but it's a little inconvenient. And we just have to look into what does it take to implement it as a policy. But just know this, the flip side to that is we had 86 compromised machines last week. And so the process that we typically follow is we give you a service account. It's a separate account other than your net ID. Make it the local admin on the machine so that you can administer the machine with a separate account. And the reason why we try to address it that way is because if you are a local admin and you're checking your email and you accidentally click the wrong thing, for example, and I get this is an instrument machine, so it might not even apply, but if you accidentally click the wrong thing, the next thing you know, the machine is infected, and so are all the machines next to it. So it's a complex problem to try to solve, but we do have a pretty good answer. It's just a little bit inconvenient. It requires you to use a separate account rather than your typical net ID. So,
Greg, and what
go ahead.
And
sorry.
then and what I do is I forbid internet in the labs, and if they have to load the programs, then they go to a hard line, and I'm there, and it gets loaded, and it gets shipped right back to the labs. That's why I do not have internet in the lab. They don't need to be checking their emails when they're doing chemistry. They don't need to be checking their emails when they're working with hydrofluoric. That's just a huge no-no for me. And I think that's a really good policy to have for labs. Nobody needs to be screwing around the lab. If you're checking your email, you go back to your desk.
Right.
I know, I'm just a mean person.
Well, and we're even meaner because the way that we enable people to have administrative access is through a service account. It basically requires you to log out and log in with a different account. Then you're a local admin and you can make your changes. Then you have to log out and log back in. But because we can't get uniform policy across the university to do the things that you just mentioned, Teresa, this has been our typical solution for solving it. And it seems to work. It's just a little bit inconvenient. And if you're okay with that, Greg and I will take that to Dwayne and see if we can push it out.
I'm all over it. That's fantastic. Yep. If I get those machines up and running, and when I rebuild them, take them over to you guys and have that, because they only last so long. They're workhorses. I'm all over that. And the ones that have Windows 7, you'll still work with me on this?
Yeah. The real issue with Windows 7, our ask there, and again, we might take this discussion offline and talk about it in more detail, but the issue with Windows 7 is it's not patched anymore. And so you can use Windows 7 as long as it's not on the network.
And that's fantastic. But this idea of having a separate account, just as just the machine account or whatever, I'd like to see that on some of my Windows 7 machines, because the temptation to pick up a laptop, although I don't let laptops in very often, is high. And let's not go there. This is a great idea, I think.
Teresa, things I'm taking away from this conversation too, is that we talked a lot about communication, right? And being more effective with communication. And what I don't want to happen is that this is the only opportunity this one time that the leadership group actually presented to have an open discussion that you can bring up these types of concerns.
Sorry.
I know, no, I know you have your ITO, and so you're really bringing up a gap. That's what I'm saying. I think I'm hearing you that there's a gap in some of our communication opportunities, and so I think I do want to also talk to Dwayne a little bit about where we can have more of these types of forums so that you folks can bring these things up. I know you have your ITO. I know you have, sometimes your applications or your other person that represents, but I think it would be good for us to also make sure that we build in some opportunities for these communication gaps, because you're very passionate and we need to be able to support you.
Thanks, Therese. I appreciate that. We appreciate that question. I know
I'll be
that
quiet
Greg,
now.
No, it's fine. It's just Greg will, and I know he'll follow up with you. Therese Anderson is her name in case you don't know her personally. He will follow up with the ITO and your question, we promise. We also have a question from John Rodriguez, and he wants to know, as we move forward, we would like to have the capability to conduct trainings, facilitations, departmental interventions, et cetera, in a hybrid fashion. So this speaks to going back into a hybrid mode as the steady state. And are we prepared to accomplish this? And do you have many questions around this situation? And Elisha has started to answer some of this in the chat, but Elisha, I'm sure other people are interested in this if you wanted to comment further.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, returning to campus is going to be more complex than leaving campus was. When we're all in this environment, everyone's virtual. You've got a screen nearby. We've all learned how to use our headsets and mute buttons. We don't have problems with audio feedback and that kind of thing that are common when you try and do this same thing in a conference room. I know a small group of people, maybe 2 or 3 people, can huddle around a laptop. That works okay. But once you get into larger meetings where you have a mixed participation between remote and on-site participants, you end up getting into building out more technology into a conference room or a classroom. And we, as Academic Technologies in conjunction with networks and platforms, did build out 80 classrooms, centrally scheduled classrooms last year to support those mixed environments. We're completing another 70 this summer. We have some departments that have their own funding that they've requested some assistance in either building a classroom or a conference room. And we're taking those requests in and assisting as we have time and resources. It helps a lot if your department has some money to invest. I will say a large space that needs to have a hybrid type meeting participation, that can cost $20,000 or more depending on what's already in the room. So it's not necessarily a cheap thing to do. And right now, I think our recommendation is if you don't have a space or you can't use one of the existing spaces, the scheduling office does the room assignment if you want to use one of those centrally scheduled spaces, but that you either have that event either all in person or all remote until you do have a space that can accommodate those kinds of mixed interactions.
Okay, thank you. I'll work with Jenny and Robert Crooks for our area. I think the 3 conference rooms that we have in our building on Lomas are equipped for this, and that's probably where we'll be working out of. So thank you for answering my question.
Sure.
Thank you. Kate asks, what is your best advice for departments as we navigate from Skype to Teams?
And Alesia put something great in the chat that I think will be a great resource. I was more just wondering, do you have like a sentence or 2 for something that you see, or maybe it's just don't panic or something like that as we navigate that transition?
I'll say, Kate, we were earlier adopters than most groups on campus for Teams, just because we were working out that service. Aside from Skype going away, there's a lot more functionality in Teams than Skype. But I think that just the basic chat and video or audio call conference functions are similar enough that it shouldn't be a heavy lift for your department. There's obviously a lot of other features in Teams with managing files and connecting to SharePoint and stuff. You can do some pretty amazing things with Teams, but just that direct transition, I don't think is that heavy of a lift.
Well, and Kate, just to tell you, the team collaboratively within IT worked together to make sure we had a lot of documentation. That's the website that I put on there. It's a great start. Neil went ahead and put something in there as well, where you can go in and kind of go back and forth between the modes. I will tell you, once you start using it, you won't want to go back to Skype. It is very, it is really easy to navigate. I love, like with our team, we were talking a lot about how to be more effective with remote work. And I'll tell you, been able to stand up different, and you can see on the screen, actually, Elaine has it here. She's working through Teams right now.
I did notice that those collaborative spaces are very robust. It's fantastic.
Yeah, you can create a team, and in the team, you can share files, you can do chats, you can do ongoing like blog chat. I mean, there's so much that you can gain from leveraging Teams. It's really great for the team meetings. You can record the sessions. There's transcription, everything from a Teams perspective. So, you know, again, go in. You also have all of us as a support. So Dwayne was very, it was very key for Dwayne as we rolled this out as a service to campus that we be available from a support perspective. So you can always reach out. You have folks on my group. Brian's team is the foundational component from a technology perspective. We're the end user, end facing part. So we're always here to help you as well.
Yeah, and just briefly, Elaine, I don't know how you feel about clicking away from your slides. And
yeah, no, I mean,
if you just click the chat button, to give you an idea, this is how you replace, if you want to see how you replace Skype, Elaine, if you just click the chat button.
I'm in the chat. What do you want me to do?
Oh, I'm seeing the slides. Click the chat on the right, on your left bar.
Oh, hang on. Like that? You want to see the chat?
Well, yeah, I'm just saying click chat because you're presenting the slides.
Right.
Show her what chat looks like.
In Teams, Elaine, not on
In
Zoom.
Teams. In Teams.
All right.
Your Teams window that you have open?
Yeah, I have the
Showing
chat
the
box
slides?
there.
Oh, it's not presenting for some reason.
That's
Maybe
because when you change it, you have to do it again. Okay,
oh,
hold on.
it's because you're in Zoom. One of the other things you'll love about
I know,
Teams.
because I'm in Zoom on a
Awkward.
Teams thing.
Yeah,
Right, we've got all these multiple systems going on. That's excellent. It's one of the I a little bit selfishly asked that question. My colleague and I are going to be presenting a topic tomorrow on virtual engagement, and we've had just some questions from people about the functionality and the capabilities, and we've definitely started doing some things internally on Teams, and I love that everything just has that running record. You don't have to go back into conversation history and those kinds of things, but we do sometimes get questions. I think, you know, change, even positive change, I think that's kind of a theme of the past year and a half. Some things are really great, some things are kind of challenging, but there's always that opportunity that's in there. So that's really something that I'm taking away. And gosh, all of these wonderful resources that are here. It's such a good reminder that if you have a question, probably somebody else has it too. And if it's an IT question, it's probably already documented for you. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I bet we have time for maybe just one more quick question for the team. And what I'll do is I'll quickly put the link to the survey in the chat window for everybody, just as we wrap up in our last few minutes.
Yeah, does anybody have any more sort of how-to or a tool they've been struggling with or something they don't know how to do? You want to quickly ask how to find that information now that you have this panel of experts here in front of you. If there's anything you're struggling with or need to get help on, or how do you get help? Is there anything the panel wants to give everyone advice about privacy and security precautions as we work remotely or in a hybrid fashion? Is there something that you want to tell the staff in general about make sure you do or don't do yes?
I have a quick question for everybody out there, and you could just answer in the chat, but I'm wondering, and this goes back to the questions that Teresa was asking and everybody, would this type of forum, if you had the entire leadership group available, or even maybe our specialists or technical staff available once in a while, would it be helpful to have folks that you could ask these questions to in different capacities?
Like on a monthly chat with the ITO leadership or specialists?
Coffee with IT or something.
Yeah. Kate Williams says she'd love that.
We could apportion some time in the campus outreach meetings to start.
Yeah. We also have a question about collection of COVID related data. Departments are asking for COVID information, vaccination status, exposure, that might not get collected in systems meant to store that type of data. Do you want to speak to that, Elisha, about the COVID data?
Yes, please, please. So if, so we had this similar situation where we were gathering symptoms information. If you're noticing that departments are separately asking for the information, if you could please send your HR, send HR a note. We're working really carefully with Kevin Stevenson. And, you know, when it comes to the student side with the chat group, things like that, to make sure that we put this data into systems that have been secured, have been qualified to be secured, and are on the right database and security components to make sure that information, especially from a vaccine perspective, because that goes another level from symptoms. So, or, you know, if you want to just send me a quick note and I can see if I could get everybody together. So the key thing is to please try to not gather this in separate systems out there that are built one-off. We're really looking and working with HR to come up with a more centralized and secure fashion for gathering vaccine information.
Thanks, Elisha. It's really important that we handle this data appropriately. Does anyone else have a data system technology question for the team? Kate is putting the survey in the chat. Please take a moment to complete the survey as we sign off on this session. If there are no further questions, we're at time. Yep. So we'll be signing off. Margaret White writes, thank you. Your collective support over 15 months was exceptional. 10 different software systems on site and remote support for students in SHAC. I'm grateful for all of you for incredible effort and dedication. Thank you so much. We really love to hear all that, especially after all the challenge of this year. And we really appreciate the feedback, and we will look like we're working to set up some forums, and we appreciate everyone attending the session today, all your questions and your attention. It looks like we'll be doing more of this, and we're looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please do complete the survey. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all so much.